and that you are looking at the guidelines. So planning A. And I'm only going to talk to you for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to cut you guys loose to go get things done. We'll talk about photosynthesis in a week. That'll be later. You need to be sure that you have time. Okay, so planning A. Your research question. All right. Be sure that your research question focuses on your investigation. Okay. So this is not a hypothesis. This is not an if-then. Okay. This is the general idea, concept, approach of your investigation. And again, I'm not telling anything new here because there's a guide. There's a guide back in the folder here. You go back to, let's see here, let's go in here. In your IA folder, right up layout. This guide here, it lays right, it lays the whole format out for you. Okay, so the research question. This question is the general purpose of your lab. Okay, it's not your hypothesis. It's not an if-then statement. It's the general idea. Okay. Then, after your research question, are your hypotheses. Some of you have 2. Some of you might have 6. Okay, you start getting up into 8 to 10. It's possible. It's not very common, but it's possible. Okay, this is an if-then statement. It's an N, right? If we do this, then this will happen. Okay, how this breaks down is this is your treatment, and this is your response, right? Well, your treatment is your independent variable, and your response is your dependent variable. Simple. It's very straightforward, right? Underneath each hypothesis is then an explanation. So it's going to go hypothesis, explanation, hypothesis, explanation. Okay, so what are you talking about in your explanation? What do you expect to happen? Okay, and then why? Why do you expect this? Okay, and then how do you know this? Now, we want to set you up for your background that's due on the 9th, all right? So inside of your explanation here, I would find 2 sources. Get on the web and find 2 sources that support this position. This is going to help you when you do your background, because guess what you need in your background? 2 sources. Guess what you're going to use? The same 2 sources. So that way the source in your background and the sources in your hypotheses are the same, and your write-up ties together. Okay? You need to be sensitive, though. You are not writing, I think. You are not writing, I feel. And you are not writing, I believe. Nothing personal in science, but guess what? We don't care what you think, what you believe. Now, not that we're insensitive people, not that your feelings, your thoughts, and your beliefs aren't important. They are extremely important outside of science. Okay, science is based on data. Science is then based on the conclusions that are formed from that data. Scientific processes, explanations, and hypotheses are then based on those conclusions, which are based on data. Okay, so when you find yourself tempted to write, I think, I feel, or I believe, right? Lift that out and say, the data shows, sources state, evidence illustrates, displays, shows, tells us. Okay, it's all about data. Okay, so for every hypothesis, there is an explanation. If then with your independent variable followed by your dependent variable. Okay, and then ultimately, when you do the comparison here, you want to come back and compare your treatment population or your treatment to one of 2 choices, either another population right? So you might compare the 10% versus the 20%, fine. Or you can compare it back to your control. Totally up to you. They're your hypotheses, okay? So you're comparing your treatment group to another treatment group, or you're comparing treatment group to your control. You didn't receive any treatment at all. Same conditions, just no treatment. Any questions on that? I want you guys to be just rock solid and comfortable here. I don't want you to be afraid of this process at all. Cool?
For when you want us to compare a treatment sample, under what section would that be? Would that be in like when we can describe our variables?
It would be right here. So if you go back to, let's go back to the potato lab, right? We soaked potato in 0% sucrose, which is really our control, it's water, right? And then our 10% sucrose and our 20% sucrose, okay? So you could say, if we expose potato tissue to a 10% sucrose solution, the mass change will be less than a sample that was exposed to 20% treatment. Okay, so you can compare your two populations. Which one's going to be faster, slower, a decrease versus an increase? That kind of comparison.
Oh, okay, as part of the explanation.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yep. Okay, the part right here. Okay, so just sitting there and saying, I'm going to throw some salt at, I don't know, plant, right? And plants are going to grow slower. Oh, great. Then the kicker is, why do you expect that? Okay, what do you expect? And what they're searching for is this. All of your investigations are based on all of them. Okay, so what's the biochemistry behind why you expect this? Why does your treatment impact your organism? Okay, we know that there is impact in growth rate or mass or whatever dependent variable you are collecting, all right? But what's the mechanism? What's going on here? What's happening at the cellular level? What is your treatment? What is your treatment doing to your organism? And where are you going to find that biochemistry? Right there. And if you have questions on that, ask me. I might know a little biochemistry, just a little. Okay, and if I don't know, then I'll help you find it. Let's go find it. Okay, and then this will then lead us right to your background, which we'll talk about next week. Okay, because what your background is here's what I decided to do. Here's why it's important to me, right? There's your personal significance, right? And then here's what I'm going to look into, and here's the biochemistry. Here's what I learned about doing the investigation, right? Here's the mechanism. Here's what's going on. Just piece by piece, this whole project just slowly comes together, or maybe quickly, depending on how you see it. Any other questions on the research question and the hypotheses?
No.
Okay. Then,
wait.
Pardon?
So, in terms of the two sources, are we going to cite them directly, or are we going to mention them and then we go into them in like like a deeper analysis later on, or?
Okay, so you refer to them in your explanation of your hypotheses, all right? You will go into more depth when you do your background, and you will go in more depth when you do your conclusions and your evaluation.
Okay.
Yep, the depth increases as you refer back to them. In the hypotheses, it is simply, we expect this because of what is shown in this source, and they say this on a, I don't want to say a superficial or simple level, but as almost as an introductory level. Does that make sense? Okay, because then in your background, you're going to give that source more depth. And when the grader reads it, they see your abstract, then they see the depth in your background, then they will read hypotheses. There's no giving them depth again. They just got done reading the depth in the background. Okay, so then when they see your discussion of the sources and the biochemistry in the hypotheses, they aren't looking for there's a reference to it, right? But they know that you have depth because they just got done reading your background. Even though you create them in reverse order, right? You create the hypothesis explanation, get an introduction to it, then go back and give the depth in the background, and then really get the general idea in your abstract. You actually create the beginning of your project backwards, and then the grader comes in and reads abstract, background, and planning. Any other questions on that? Okay. The only other thing that I need to bring your attention to is there's the lab write-up guidelines in the IA folder. Please, please, please have these out and next to you or on another screen or referring back to them as you write about your one independent variable, your one dependent variable, and you discuss your controls. Okay, and then be aware that your controls need all 4 of these characteristics. Okay, and I told you how we see you write about the first control, and then you write about the second control, and then you write about the third control, and it's like your stamina starts to run out. So if you start to feel that way, stop, step away from it, do some other work, and then come back to it so that your control explanations are all about equal sized. Okay, the same thing happens on the hypotheses. We will see the first hypothesis explanation is pretty big, and then the second hypothesis explanation is a little smaller, and the third hypothesis is a little smaller, and you can just watch the student fade. So don't do that. All right, keep it nice and consistent. Your explanations are going to be pretty similar, right? So don't feel like, oh, I already said that. Say it again. Right. So then what I want to do is I want to give you time to work. Okay. So I'm staying here. I'm not going anywhere. So if you have any questions, either come back in here or text me or even call me, and I'm happy to help. Don't forget to type attend in the chat. And you know what? Have a good Thursday.